Chapter 9. Fraser was getting used to navigating Shropshire's narrow, steep lanes, walled in by high hedges for minimum visibility, but found it appreciably harder without Corby as a second pair of eyes. She had been right about Pitbull and the overtime. He was happy for her to be roaming Shropshire on a Saturday, but drew the line at forking out for 2 officers. Had it been formal interviews, he would have stuck to protocol, but all she was doing was sniffing around, as he put it. Having once had to manage budgets herself, she couldn't really blame him. After speaking to Pitbull, she had called the bunkhouse, only to find that the archaeologists were out on their dig, despite it being a Saturday. 1 or 2 of them take the weekend off, Marianne Leonard had explained, but not the senior ones unless something major comes up. You'll find Donald, Sam and Helen up at the Ringfort, if that's who you're after.
Were they all working on the dig last year?
Donald and Sam were. They had a different finds expert last year.
Man or woman?
Fraser asked. Does it matter? Marianne said before adding, Man, I can probably find his details if you need them. The bunkhouse manager's lack of curiosity had struck her as unusual. Surely she must wonder why Fraser was asking about the archaeologists. Perhaps it was part of her carefully managed indifference. Whatever the reason, Fraser wished she had an excuse to be calling in at the bunkhouse. And not only for the coffee and cake. There was something about Marianne Leonard that kept prodding at her brain. Access to the dig at Green Hill was via an old mining track from Snail Beach. The village wasn't much to look at. A few old stone cottages, most of the houses dating from the 1940s onwards, utilitarian rather than picturesque. But why should it be picturesque just because it was rural? Perhaps she'd become a bit of a townie after all her years in London. At home on Mull, it had always irritated her that visitors expected every dwelling to be beautiful. Rural properties were functional, in keeping with their environment, just like those in a city. It was city folk who romanticised them. The Romans once mined lead at Snail Beach. Since the 1950s, the place had served only as a source of pebble dash for the building industry. Corby had told her the old mine was worth a visit, though, if she had time on her hands. Just then, she hadn't. The road to the mining track was a relief after some of the winding lanes she'd thrashed the Land Rover down on her way. Still single track, but without the high hedges, allowing her to see where there were passing spaces. There was something desolate about the country here, unashamedly stark, the grey of rocks merging with dull greens and browns dotted here and there with sheep. Over a cattle grid, the road petered out into a rough cinder track, one side falling away steeply as she followed the contours ever upwards. This part of Shropshire was an archaeologist's playground. Forts, barrows and stone circles in every direction. If she stayed in this neck of the woods, maybe she'd take it up as a weekend hobby. She'd always had a fascination with the past, and a background in science made archaeology the most appealing gateway. The Land Rover's engine groaned with the effort on an ascent that would have been impossible without 4-wheel drive. Fraser's heart beat a little faster as she steered into the slope, tasting the thrill that a challenge always gave her. This was less like work and more like a day out, and she was getting paid. Why in hell had she stayed in London for so long? Once she crested a rise, the dig was visible, less owing to the earth bank that reared ahead, and more to the row of mud-splattered Land Rovers, various university names adorning their paintwork. Beside them were a couple of portaloos. She parked her police vehicle alongside the archaeologist's 4x4s. The wind tore at her and slammed the door hard enough to shake the vehicle's frame, no matter how she tried to resist its force. Despite the sunshine, she was glad she'd thought to bring a jacket as she climbed a well-worn path that snaked between 2 tall turf banks. 3 times her height, they stood as a testament to engineering skill, especially considering they predated mechanical diggers and excavators. Passing between them was like leaving the known world behind, their looming presence hinting at menace. Immediately, she found shelter from the wind, the air surprisingly warm. A roughly oval area of about 2 acres spread out before her, its turf floor crisscrossed with the dark brown scars of trenches. Some were long and narrow, others square, the largest about 10 metres on each side. Wheelbarrows, buckets and sifting equipment littered the walkways between the trenches, most of which were found at the north end near the entrance. In their orange high-vis waistcoats, the diggers punctuated the scene with spots of intense colour. Some knelt or crouched in trenches, Others wielded shovels with vigour. Beneath a small marquee, a group sat in front of a table on which stood an array of plastic boxes. At Fraser's approach there was a shout from the group, and a figure in khaki and brown, almost military beneath his neon waistcoat, stood up in the nearest trench. Donald McIntyre looked better in his battered leather hat than he had showing off his thinning hair in the bunkhouse dining room. More confident out here, that was certain, and he'd been confident enough before. Here he was king in his kingdom. There, she suspected, Marianne ruled the roost.
"Georgie Fraser?"
He came towards her with one hand held out, gloves and trowel in the other.
"We weren't expecting you. Come to get a private view of the dig."
The Irish lilt washed over her. Comforting, though not as much as the accents of home. Funny how accents could instill a mood. Liverpool or Manchester always grated on her skin. Birmingham sounded dozy and well-meaning. London or Essex sharp and edgy. All quite erroneous perceptions, of course.
"It's certainly worth the drive, and I'd love a private view one day. But sadly this is work. Do you have time for a quick word?"
McIntyre looked back to his trench and shoved his trowel into a holster on his belt. He looked every inch a man torn from his work.
"Our hospitality's not up to much, but there are a couple of chairs in the fines tent, and there might even be a flask of coffee somewhere if you fancy one. Can't swear to the cleanliness of the cups, though."
The man didn't seem worried by her visit. Curious, perhaps, but he kept up his patter all the way to the tent. The diggers around the table were eating, and one or two of them, Fraser recognised the girl with pink dreadlocks, said hello. No one seemed to mind when he asked them to take their lunch outside.
"So, how can I help?"
he asked, once they had the tent to themselves and were seated on either side of the table, the white boxes like the proverbial elephant to their left. Fraser itched to look inside them.
"We've confirmed the identity of our victim, and I'm afraid this has raised a few more questions. It seems one of your team might have known her. Perhaps you even."
McIntyre bounced onto his feet again and rummaged around in a box set behind the table. He pulled out a flask and a couple of disposable cups.
"Coffee. Black, I'm afraid. Someone else might have some with milk if you prefer."
Fraser waved a hand to show that she was fine without and waited for him to settle again. People often needed time to allow conversation, fending off questions that might make them uncomfortable with action. He poured himself a coffee and turned back to the box, rootling around until he found a plastic container.
"Flapjack."
"I wouldn't say no, if that's from the bunkhouse, of course."
"Oh, she's a baker, all right, Marianne. I've been based here these last 3 summers, and we've become good friends. Even if we hadn't, I'd keep going back for the food."
He passed Fraser a square of flapjack, still wrapped in its paper bag, and settled back into his chair.
"So, questions?"
he said, as though there was something he was looking forward to. Fraser almost expected him to rub his hands together.
"Your dead girl. Oh, sorry," he added. "I didn't mean to sound glib."
"Her name was Anna Price." Fraser took out her phone and called up the photos of Anna that Mona Balbriggan had sent through earlier. There were 2. The first was her official staff photo from the school, a head and shoulders shot, smiling, neat and professional in a lemon-yellow cardigan and a white blouse. The other was from a school residential trip. Dark brown hair, tied back in a ponytail from which strands had escaped and blown around her face. She looked carefree, as different from the post-mortem photograph that Pitbull had shown around the centre as could be. She handed the phone to McIntyre.
"I don't know the name," he said, looking at the photos, his brow furrowed. "And do you think one of my team knew her?"
"She attended a talk you gave last year at the Carding Mill National Trust Centre."
McIntyre smiled. "Ah, sure, we do one every year. Updates on how our 3 digs are progressing, mainly for locals, but some come from further afield."
3 digs?
"Here, of course, but we also have projects up on the Long Mend and on Brown Clee. I'm based here, but I head up the full project. All ring forts from around the same era. You could see Bodbury on the Mend from Brown Clee, and this one from Bodbury, as though they formed some kind of chain. Fascinating to think that."
He seemed about to go off on a flight of enthusiasm, but Fraser's smile must have stopped him, and he looked instead at the photos.
"Funny. The face is familiar. I wouldn't have recognised her from the photo yesterday, but the hair's different."
He rubbed the top of his hat as though considering his own.
"I don't know her, but I think I have seen her before. At the talk, I suppose. Sorry." He grinned disarmingly. "I'm not great with faces." It seems you inspired her. She was a teacher and set up an archaeology club at her school. One of your team apparently did a talk for her.
McIntyre rubbed his chin.
Could have been a few contenders. You think it was someone from this side?
The head teacher seemed to think so. The archaeologist sighed and rubbed his hat again.
Only one possibility then. Want me to find him?